And so now we're going to get tactical. We're going to shift gears. I believe it was General Patton who said, a good plan violently executed today is better than a perfect plan next week. So to that, this panel, we're going to hear from two individuals. We have Trace Larsen. He's the VP of Operations for one of America's most admired restoration companies, Utah Disaster Cleanup. And we have Chuck Violand of Violand Management, who brings over 30 years of advising top restorers on how to build profitable, rock-solid companies. So this session will be a panel, and like previous panels, I'm going to give each panelist an opportunity to kind of respond to an opening question, and then we're going to questions. So we're really going to rely on all the participants for you to be able to provide some questions that you'd like to serve up. And just a reminder to really, we want to keep our questions around the topic of operations. So what is operations? Just as a quick refresher, we're talking cash flow, delivering the service, maintaining the office, keeping things going, keeping the money coming in and the services going out, just all of the gears within the engine of this business. And so to kick things off, Chuck, I want to start with you. Chuck, great to have you here.
Thank you.
And then we're going to go over to you, Trace, is how has operations been impacted by the virus, and what should we be doing about it?
Well, clearly there's been a pretty big disruption with the coronavirus coming in here, and it's kind of changed the way a lot of people are approaching the work that they do. I think it's made them more cautious about the way they do things. My feeling is, and looking across a lot of the clients with whom we work and the people that we interact with, I think it's as much, not as much creating issues, although it certainly created its own challenges. I think it's uncovered an awful lot of things, awful lot of inefficiencies that as business owners, we just kind of gloss over and let take place as long as cash flow is strong. And then as soon as cash flow is strong, or as soon as there's a stress on any system, it's going to highlight things. And so it's going to expose the challenges that were there to begin with. So in addition to the specific things with COVID-19, I think what it's done just as much as that is it's exposed issues that existed before this that really are getting addressed now.
Well said. And I think, I can't remember where the quote came from, but as you were describing, the quote came to mind, Chuck, was, tough times kind of almost expose problems, where good times sometimes hide problems. And I've heard variants of that applied to management and leadership and whatnot. But I think that's really well said, is that, it's exposing problems we didn't even maybe know about in our companies. So that's well said. Trace, over to you. The same question is, we know that the virus has impacted operations. Maybe tell us, what impact has it had, just tangibly speaking, in the operations of your organization?
Yeah, absolutely. Major changes and major effects are hitting us. You go from almost an immediate slowdown to some extent of incoming work, simultaneously dealing with a potential new service coming in that is few are really at the ready to handle. Like you say, a good plan executed flawlessly. Well, I don't think anybody really had a plan for this. Maybe some brighter minds than myself were ready for it, but you had to shift on the fly with dealing with a slow in the incoming of your day-to-day core competency work, and now align how to handle the new incoming. I was surprised to an extent of how immediate the restoration industry was looked at to be the provider for the answers, for the cleanings, for disinfections. I think to an extent we probably knew that was coming, but I admittedly was surprised at how we were right in the crosshairs for the industry to provide the answers.
It's interesting. When this broke out, I'm sure every business owner, every government organization was saying, so who actually solves this? And I think back to a previous panel, Mark made a great point. He said his governor said, we think restoration companies are not only essential, but they're critical. So that's right in line with what was said. Well, I now that we've kind of opened things up, I want to encourage our participants to throw those questions down. We want to keep the topic to operations, and so we're going to start with you, Chuck. We've got our first question. It's a question about accountability, and so the question in operations around accountability is how should project managers and supervisors hold accountability with workers, while keeping the very real implications of COVID-19 in mind? I think about, accountability to results and performance.
Clearly, the most important thing is a project manager or any worker's health and the health of our customers. So it's crucial to take that variable into consideration when looking at accountability. But in my opinion, accountability really hasn't changed. I don't feel that a crisis is going to change how we hold people accountable and the importance for a project manager, anybody in the organization, to maintain accountability. I'm going to go back to my earlier comment. Have we just exposed a lack of accountability in a system, and suddenly now we're faced with having to find new ways to hold people accountable? And so going back to the basics, let's have the systems in place that we've used or that we should be using, and the accountability measures that we have, hold them accountable to it, whether it's virtual or in person.
Thanks, Chuck. Trace, same question to you. I'm curious what accountability to performance looks like right now in your operation.
Yeah, well, I think Chuck hit the nail on the head there, that it hasn't changed, but there is an added element to it, at least in our organization. It's the jobs, the tasks, they're still there to be done, and you have to, do what you would normally do to verify or quantify or whatever you're going to do to ensure that gets done. But now you have the additional layer of, are you keeping yourself to a higher level of safety, cleanliness, your customer's property, your vehicles, everything that, again, Chuck hit the nail right on the head there, that these are things that absolutely should have been being done all the time. We're an industry that's pretty well trained, or should be well trained in, PPE, proper donning and doffing of that, and how you keep a work site safe. And, I'll speak candidly, those things get lax sometimes, especially when, times get busy. Now you have the immediate impact of, you could see somebody infected with a virus within days of some kind of contact. So you could immediately know that your efforts weren't being done correctly, and you could lose staff members. You could lose your entire staff. You could infect coworkers, customers, anything. So that level of accountability is more than just the task. Adding the health element to it is certainly paramount over everything. And I know Chuck said that.
And I'm going to go to what Trace just got done saying. If I could jump in here, he's absolutely right. And the first person we have to look at being accountable is us. As the owners or leaders of an organization, we have to set the standard. We can't expect somebody else to do something that we're not doing. And in my opinion, and this is just Chuck's opinion, I think our biggest challenge is yet ahead of us. As a lot of the restrictions start to get eased, I think that it will be human nature for us to get lax or sloppy with that stuff. And who knows what could happen then? I think we have to be doubly vigilant and accountable.
No, I think that's really well said. Thanks, guys. Another question that I want us to dive into is to build on what was said just a moment ago by you, Trace, about how the industry was kind of seen as the industry that should really have the answers. The customer is receiving information from all types of inputs: news, friends, family, Facebook, and there's a need sometimes to educate the customer to be able to keep business moving forward, to make sure that they have the facts, that we're not misleading them, but we're giving them the facts so that business can maintain progress, and yet we're keeping their safety as a top priority. So Trace, I'm wondering if there's anything that you guys are doing in your organization to educate the customer to be able to kind of keep things moving ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, to some extent, isn't that really what we are as a service provider, is a bridge from the customer to, whatever the governing authority or the experts, and we're that expert to a level. But again, this was a new service line, and we're having to gain things from the CDC, from the EPA, things like that. So we're to a level, that bridge for the customer to there, and then we provide the service along with it. So I find in this industry, there's always a lot of explaining to the customer. It's not a simple service line where you just say, we're going to replace your toilet. And, there's an inherent idea of what that is. We have to explain a lot of what we do, who the players are. We deal a lot with insurance, so you're explaining that. So this isn't really foreign to us to explain to customers, a lot of information before any service begins. So yeah, we're explaining our methods, what we'll do, what their expectation can be, and let's be honest, a lot of disclaimer.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair. And one of our partners for this event is Ed Cross and his team. And so, getting those documents in place and all those things are something where they help with. So that's well said. Chuck, the same question to you. I'm curious. Educating the client is a big part of the restoration industry. What's your advice for so many of the viewers right now that are wondering, when we talk to a customer, they're giving us information, and really we want to make sure that the information we give them is accurate, but also we need to be able to keep the business going. What's your advice on educating the customer?
I'll tell you, I'm going to take my answer from the example of a lot of our clients. I am thrilled with the level of creativity that some of our clients have come up with as a result of this. And you want to talk about a silver lining in such a horrible thing. I think, in my opinion, this is one of them. And they have gone to educational videos, just instructional videos that they push out to clients, to their workers, just to the general public on best practices, what to look for as they're doing their work. And even from a marketing perspective, maybe even especially from a marketing perspective, they're using digital and social platforms to get their message out. Now, I know that probably made me sound like I knew what I was talking about as far as digital and social. I don't, okay? But I watched the example of a lot of our younger clients, and they are really some sharp folks. So it's pretty exciting.
No, I think that is something that we're seeing across the industry as well. It's like this creativity. It's that innovative spirit that's coming.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Another question here to both of you guys, and Chuck, maybe I'll start with you, and then Trace, would love to get your perspective. And this is something that's come up again and again. We do these types of webinars every couple of weeks, and this is just something that's come up again and again. So it's great to see it come up again. And you have homeowners and business owners who may have seen a loss of income. And then you have work that gets done. And then sometimes the way that money comes in is it goes to the business owner or the homeowner. And so there's a challenge around navigating what might be some AR problems. There's a challenge around, maybe navigating, some people that hold back payment. And that's something that is a very real concern. Could you offer us some advice on how to anticipate that, how to deal with that? How are you advising your clients?
Yeah, that's a great question, actually, and it is a very real situation. I'm going to go back to my comment about exposing weaknesses. In the first place, an AR issue does not start when the project is done. An AR issue starts when you take the project on. So the initial step is making sure that you're taking the right projects and not taking the wrong projects. And then setting the expectation right up front. That's the starting point. Nothing else is going to matter if you don't get that first. So always start with detailing those expectations. Here are the rules, folks, if we're going to do this work. We want the work, but this is how we have to operate. It's going to give you a better platform to work from later on.
And so if somebody's found themselves in a situation where, to use your term, it's kind of, it's exposed weaknesses in the processes, and now they're in a position where this is a real present reality. Chuck, could you offer any tips on maybe how to communicate with that client? I'm envisioning a client that might be kind of stonewalling them. What would be your advice there, Chuck?
Yeah, I'm going to fall back on my documentation. The first place I'm going to go is the fundamentals. And I'm going to go back to my documentation and stand firm on that. Now, will my tone perhaps be a little bit different during this difficult, uncertain time? Probably. Personally, I feel that Many of us could use a second helping of compassion right now. And if somebody truly is in a difficult situation, let's work with them. We still have to get our money. We know that. So let's work to an agreement to get our money. But I think a lot of it has to do with the way that you deliver the message, as it does with the message that's delivered.
In a previous panel that we had a couple of weeks ago, Phil Rosebrook made a comment that lines up with what you're saying, and he said something, and I'm paraphrasing, but he said, be compassionate and treat people well, because people are going to remember how during the very unnerving period of time. And Phil really stressed how important it is to invest in those relationships, because this is a very raw moment, and it's a chance to really build human connections and build new relationships that will actually last long past this thing.
Two things on that. Number one, I'm glad that what I said was in alignment with what Phil said. Phil's a smart guy. All right, so that's nice to know. The other thing is, and to his point exactly, during times of uncertainty, during times of crisis, simple gestures carry added weight that linger with people long after pandemic does. And so build those relationships now, because they will stand out later on.
Yeah, that's well said. Trace, I want to come back to you with the same question, that whole question of that concern of accounts receivable challenges that may come to light as clients or business owners who've had to weather difficult cash flow are now faced with, do I keep the money? Do I give it to the restorer? How are you dealing with that? That's a difficult nut to crack.
Yeah, it is, and I completely agree with Chuck. He basically was taking the words right out of my mouth there, but I'll add what I can to it. A lot of this will start with, what was your baseline prior to the pandemic? We know in this industry, there are those that are very strong in this, and what I would assumptively guess is that most are not. There's I'll get the payment when it comes. I'm doing my best. I got to work with insurance and mortgage and customer and possibly others. There's a lot to getting your money. So how strong you were prior to the pandemic beginning is going to be your baseline to start going forward. So I think it was Dan Cassera in the earlier session said how many things are going to be so different and afterwards. And we know that, but that was one thing that came immediately to mind for me, was how people are going to manage their cash. If you weren't strong before, if you didn't have good policies, strong contracts, understanding with your customers about draw payments, deposits, when the work will be done, then you should now, and you should carry forward after this. I definitely agree with what Chuck said. A small gesture will go a long way. We've had a lot of discussions with our executive committee and managers about, the silver linings that'll come out of this, the relationships we'll build with, commercial clients and any potential customer down the road. But a small gesture might be just some understanding, a little bit of leeway. It's not going to be, financing large sums of money for long periods of time. That's not a small gesture. That's a poor business decision.
Good point.
There's an understanding and there's some compassion that needs to absolutely be out there. And I think a lot is coming out with this pandemic. Most are going that way. You're seeing businesses adapt and get very creative. But at the end of the day, they are businesses as well. And it's okay to explain to your customer that they may be going through a hard time. We can work things together, but that shouldn't mean that your personnel goes without a paycheck either.
Yeah, no, well said. Well said. Guys, another question that has come in, and there's been questions that, associated with pricing and sales and estimating and how that's adapting. Trace, why don't we start with you? How have you adapted your sales processes during this whole pandemic, and anything that you could offer in terms of how you've also had to modify your estimating approach? Could you speak to that?
Absolutely. Sales wise, you have obviously almost no ability to get in front of people right now. So there's the need to get creative. People can only be on so many web calls, Zoom calls, conference calls, whatever. If you're going to try and show up at anyone's office or whatever, you're basically, it's a pretty inconsiderate thing to do right now. So our sales staff is is very much shackled by that right now. They're getting as creative as they can. There's also an element of repurposing going on. I have to commend our sales teams in all of our offices that they're willing to jump in and help anywhere they can. We've had over the last few months, some peaks and valleys of incoming work, and they've helped, kind of smooth that over and helping anywhere they can. It might be, helping out load trucks, and it might be helping with paperwork and things like that. So getting creative on the sales end, being willing for some repurposing for short term, that's huge. Pricing, I think, is a really big, I don't think there's been, at least in many of the meetings I've been in, there's probably not been a more common discussion going on. And I think it's been fantastic. I think it's another one of those things that the silver lining is there. And there's a little bit of a separation of good businesses and good restorers from others right now. There's been a lot of people out there just say, oh, tell me what should the price be? What is the software and databases that we all know? What is their price saying this should be? This is teaching people that you shouldn't be relying on what someone tells you your pricing should be. You should be able to figure this out on your own. And depending on if you are dried up on work in other areas and you're using, COVID to supplement that, or it's just been supplemental work and you're now well beyond capacity, your pricing is going to be vastly different from someone else's. But if you can't figure that out internally, and that is a little bit of a disappointment in some companies I see out there, that they just want someone to tell them what their pricing should be. If you can't sit down with your costs and your personnel and get whoever you need to involved to determine that, that's a sign that you need to be looking at that, because it's not going to just matter as far as your restoration pricing. If you're going to do some COVID-19 disinfection work, it's going to carry on well beyond this, that you're going to be a victim of not controlling your prices and probably not controlling your costs beyond that.
And I think it's an interesting balance that you're describing between, Rich Wilson said in the previous session about one of the 4 things they're doing is short-term cash planning. And yet, what you're saying as well is, we're going to come out of this thing, and if you don't have some of those things in order, you may think you're avoiding a problem today, but it's coming, right? No, thanks, Trace. Chuck, I'm curious, you alluded to that a lot of your clients are doing some very creative things on educating the customer. I wonder, it's probably not a stretch to assume that they're probably doing some creative things on pricing and sales. Could you highlight maybe some case studies, some examples of things that you're seeing your clients do to adapt their sales and estimating right now?
Actually, they're not going wild with their pricing. I 100% agree with what Trace just got done saying. And this is not the time, just as Trace was alluding to, this is not the time to gouge, to overcharge for services simply because you think you can. It is a time to revisit your pricing models, as you should do in a business frequently anyway. And that way you have a better handle on your costs and whether you're making money or not. And so from a creative perspective, I'm not sure that there is any creative pricing going on. Well, I'm sure there is, but none that I'm aware of. So, yeah, I would follow Trace's advice. I see this, we're recording this, I go back and replay the last 5 minutes and play it back, so.
Absolutely. And perhaps even just to rephrase it slightly from a sales perspective, some things that we're seeing, we're seeing some individuals include video into their sale, into technologies in their sales. Clients do anything to, as Trace said, no one's meeting with anyone one-to-one right now. Right. Clients do anything to bridge the gap.
Oh, yeah. No, from that perspective, absolutely. If I could just jump in, I apologize for interrupting you there. I get excited about this because of the creativity of a lot of these marketing reps, sales reps, CSRs out there. And they are using a lot of videos. They're using a lot of things. They're putting a lot of things on LinkedIn. They're expanding their LinkedIn networks and utilizing that the way it should be utilized. A lot of them are using Loom videos, Loom videos, and pushing out good information in a personal format when you can't be in front of them. You can still be on a screen talking personally to them. It's a powerful format to either one-on-one or to a group. And once again, they're doing more of that, being more creative with the things that they're doing, and they're making a lot of really good contacts, both maintaining the ones that they've already got, but opening up new relationships with people that they have not been able to connect with before.
And if I could add to that, Chuck, if you're able, I think our sales reps are taking this approach. If you're able to gain their trust now with what's going on, I think it's almost a guarantee you're going to gain it for their next, water loss next July or something like that.
Yep.
Well said.
100%.
Well said to both of you. Guys, another question that we would love to get both of you to weigh in on is that there is something that's happening across the whole nation, which is other service providers who may traditionally not have provided, let's call it sanitization services. We're thinking about maybe some of the cleaners, we're thinking about some of, the maintenance and probably out of good intentions to maybe keep the lights on, are beginning to advertise that they are beginning to offer, COVID compliance services and whatnot. And they may not have some of the robustness that a restoration company has. Trace, I'd like to start with you, but I'm curious if there's anything you've done tactically as a company to deal with, this new reality that there are some other services that are probably encroaching on the industry, maybe a lot of price cutting. Have you experienced that, Trace? And if so, I'm curious how you're responding.
I can't say we've experienced a lot as far as price comparative. It might be a little early for us on that, but we've seen a lot of what you're talking about. And I think it's pretty bold of us as an industry to say, how dare you come into our territory? Clean is clean. There's a lot of levels of it. I'm sure that, our adjacent industries probably view it that way as well. It goes back to that earlier question of what are you doing to educate the customer? In my opinion, I'm offering a higher level service. I can document that. I can show you what we're going to provide. And if somebody is providing apples to apples and they're, beating our price or whatever, well, then tip my hat to you. You won that battle and we'll move on. But it's really about, educating your customer and, providing a fair value. It's okay to be profitable. It's not a time to gouge. And we're certainly not going to be the only industry that's looking into this. We are in all of our markets seeing it, janitorial and general cleaning and restoration combined. I think it probably, if anything, keeps you on your toes that everything out there right now is going to be a little competitive.
That's well said, Chuck. I have a question for you, Chuck, unless you want to respond to that, Chuck.
Well, I'll weigh in on that. Trace is exactly right. And Trace has been at this game long enough. Most of the viewers on this call, I'm sure, have been at this long enough to remember 2008, 2009. And back then, when the economy collapsed, every building contractor, every modeler in the country suddenly became a restorer. And so we were faced with having to do exactly what Trace said: emphasize the value that you have from a certified restorer or from somebody who's been an experienced, somebody who's been doing it for a long period of time. This is the value that we bring to you. It's the trust that you can have in the service that we provide. And you have to just reinforce that.
No, I think that's well put. Thanks to both of you for that. Another question that's come up is really a question around stopping and starting spending. And so as a question, just tactically speaking, there are areas where I'm sure, Trace, we'll start with you, where your organization has just stopped spending. You probably really pulled back. Some areas you've really leaned up. And then there's probably some areas where you've really ramped up spending. Could you maybe speak to that? Give us some insight, Trace, into where that's taking place in your organization?
Yeah, when the PPE costs go up fourfold, you typically spend more on PPE. But no, I know what you're getting at. The lines, and maybe a lot aren't ready for this, and this should be another lesson taken away as this diffuses down the road. But you should be looking at your annual budget. Where are you at, or whatever time period of budget you're looking at. If you're quarterly or annual or whatever, if your incoming work and your profitability looks the same and you have a budget, you probably don't make a ton of changes. Your cash flow is likely going to tighten. It's going to be harder to bring money in the door. If you're substantially down, you need to decide what are the luxuries you're going to cut out. Things that we're spending maybe a little more on are things that are a little more aligned to COVID-19 disinfection work. Some tools and supplies related to that. Otherwise, you may want to table some CapEx items for a period of time, at least until you have a comfortable enough amount of information to make a decision. I don't think, what have we been in this, 7-8 weeks? I don't know that that's enough time for anyone to really make a decision. I'm sure there was a lot of decisions set to be made of various companies at that time that have been tabled, but it's probably not enough time to make long-term decisions. But take it to if you don't have a budget, you should, and go off of that.
Oh, thanks, Trace. Chuck, I'm curious, and I have a follow-up question as well, Chuck, for you. But I'm curious, are you seeing your clients? Are you advising them in areas where they should even proactively just pull back spending?
Actually, I think and again, it's going to sound like I'm just parroting Trace. That was sound financial advice. You take a look at your budget, and you should have a budget. You take a look at those, and okay, what things can we postpone? Not necessarily get rid of, but postpone that we don't absolutely need to have. It isn't mission critical right now, and let's just hit the pause button on those, hold off on them until some of this dust settles. I also agree with Trace that where the spending should go up, or at least where you should look at maintaining it, certainly is the health and welfare, safety and health of our workers and our customers. That's primary, okay? If you don't win that game, you've lost the game. The second thing that we noticed is that several people have cut way back on their marketing, even to the point where they've let marketing people go. In my opinion, that was a mistake. Probably this is the time that you need them more than ever. And I'm going to speak from a generational perspective here. Understand that this is a guy with gray hair, okay? Speak from a generational perspective. A lot of the digital and social marketing that we're doing, most of us aren't hardwired. That is not our first language. We speak it haltingly, and so we need but yet our voice is still important. So having somebody on board who understands those platforms can help us be better at getting our message out from an owner's perspective or a senior leader's perspective to our customers and potential customers, rather than simply turning it off.
Yeah, absolutely. And to build on that, kind of a related question that came in was really around that vendor supplier and more around kind of relationships and making those decisions. In our last panel, one of the things that Rich Wilson said was that is how he prioritizes the vendor relationships within his organization. But I'm curious, maybe we start with you, Trace, and then Chuck, if you'd like to weigh in. What would you say to a vendor supplier right now when you're requesting an extended payment timeline? Right now, for many of the participants, they're in a position where the ability to have a little bit of airspace from a vendor supplier would be helpful. I'm curious, Trace, what would be your advice? Could you advise on maybe the business decision associated with that, and maybe also maybe the conversation that has to be had? What's
that number one phrase being said right now? We're all in this together. So honesty, I think it goes back to what was your baseline prior to this. If you didn't have solid relationships with your vendors and your suppliers that they don't understand, and they're going through a really rough time as we all are, they don't want to hear that you're going to have an extended amount of time to pay them, but you've got to be candid about it. You've got to be honest about it. Ask the tough questions. Offer the solution. Don't keep it vague. Don't keep it, can I pay you sometime? you've got to be fair to them. It's not right to just leave it out there too far out. There's long-term relationships at stake between you and your suppliers. What you can do, they want you to stay in business as well. If you didn't have some kind of good relationships before, that's probably a good indication that you've got something wrong internally. But to me, it's candid, honest conversations. If you can't pick up the phone, talk to somebody who has a decision-making level ability with whatever vendor or supplier you have to make some kind of agreement, it's going to be a real slippery slope.
Thanks, Trace. Chuck, anything that you'd want to add to that, Chuck, in terms of navigating the vendor relationships right now with cash flow and preserving the relationship and yet being practical?
Well, again, I'm gonna echo what Trace was saying. Communication is critical. Understand that Violand Management is a small business, just like most of the people in this webcast. Okay, so we have the same issues, and we have been approached by a couple of our clients who have asked for delay in their payments to us, but they reached out to us, and I had a conversation with them, just like Trace was suggesting, and you work through it. Again, we're all in this together. We're looking out for each other's best interest, but we've also got businesses to run. So communicate with your vendor.
We only have time for maybe one, maybe two more questions, and so one of the things that was mentioned particularly in the last panel was how what you do over the next 5 weeks will have a huge impact on how you're remembered and really kind of how your business moves forward over the next 10 years. Chuck, from your perspective, is there anything that you could offer us just tactically in terms of best practices? Some of those, if you're not doing this, make sure you're doing this. Again, I really believe that how we manage and operate through the next 5 to 6 weeks here is really going to determine even how we come out of 2020 and whether or not we will reevaluate those goals or just throw those goals out the window. What are some of the best practices that you would suggest?
Touch people. I can't overemphasize the need for that, especially when we're all feeling so cloistered, so removed from everything. The simple human touch, a phone call, I mean, not physical touch, but and I want to make sure that I'm clear on that, but, a video, a Skype, an email, a phone call, touch people, and not just customers. If you're not touching the people in your organization on a regular basis, this is what you need to be doing. And I guess I'm speaking to owners in this particular thing. Most of us aren't particularly good communicators. We like to think we are. Okay, open door policy, that whole business. Okay, we're not as good as we think we are, present company included. So we have to work doubly hard at maintaining or building that closeness, that relationship for when this whole thing is over. Going back to those touch points are going to weigh, they're going to loom much higher in people's memory. And so this is the time to do it, not just our own people, but our customers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think especially if it's not your personality type. Oftentimes, to be a good operator sometimes is the ability to just put your head down and just shovel a lot of gravel, and so the ability to come up for air and see as an a priority the importance of interacting and having that human connection.
I just got done doing a 3-part video series using Winston Churchill and the time during the Battle of Britain in 1940, and how he communicated. Now, he was a natural communicator, okay, but how he communicated with the people of London and with the British people throughout that. And it's good. Look, we're doing the same thing. We need to be doing the same thing, reassuring our people and our customers. This is the time to do that.
Excellent. Trace, I'm curious if you'd like to weigh in on that same question. If there's anything you'd like to add to that.
Yeah, it's my turn to just echo Chuck. I think I completely agree with him. We've had this discussion with a lot of peers, with a lot of people in our company. I think there's going to be a lot of people, and we'll speak to the manager level or the owner level, that are going to come through this looking great or really poor. And you can take whatever approach you're going to, and I'll speak more at the manager level on this. Is for us, for our decision makers, it's about the people. It's about the employees and the customer, and we're not going to ignore profitability. We have a business to run. But if you can't keep safety and people's wellness at the top of that right now, when they're going through a lot of things, when they leave whatever job, whatever their task is for the day, they're going home to, you don't know what. Maybe they're, some people are a little lax about, if COVID-19 is going to be a big deal, and some are much more freaked out. It's not your place to, as a manager, as their supervisor, to judge it or to weigh in on it. It's your place to support them, and you are offering them a place to work, and hopefully you can keep them there doing that. But you need to keep them safe doing that. That's going to be the biggest part, at least in our company, that we're focusing on. We're still going to push for work. We're still going to maintain, the profitable benchmarks that we want, but that all has to be done with a higher level of safety right now. And that I think is what's going to come out of the next several months.
Mm-hmm. Well, Trace, let's start with you, and then Chuck, over to yourself as we move towards closing this. It's been a great, just really tactical operations panel. And before we shift to our last panel, I'm curious, owners are watching, operators are watching right now. If you had to just say, what, if I had to just boil it down to, make sure you're doing this, make sure you're not doing this, from just keeping the business moving ahead, Trace, what would you say? And then Chuck, I'd like to pose that same question to you.
Yeah, I probably can't add any real prophetic statement there. It's what we've talked about. It's communication, and this is probably a little bit do as I say, not as I do. I am working to be better at that. I think everyone in our organization is better than they were 2 months ago at it, but there's still a long ways to go. And I think a big thing that really matters is transparency right now. Don't cloud anything, not to your customers, not to your employees, not to anyone. If your insurance provider, if you're, got good relationships from an insurance company that sends you a lot of work and they're starting to squawk about you're charging too much for PPE, explain what your practices are, explain why you're doing it. It's just an absolute time for honesty and transparency all across the board.
And I think that really echoes what Dan Casero was saying in our last panel, where we asked him, what are you doing? Like, what's a big theme right now? And he said, being honest. Being honest with my people, being honest with my network, and being honest with my clients. And so that's really insightful, Trace. Chuck, same question to you as we move towards wrapping this up. If you had a minute on the phone with some of your clients who are these leaders and operators, and they say, Chuck, just tell me, what should I be doing right now? What should I not be doing? What's your advice?
Yeah, I'm gonna go back and suggest that we do exactly what Trace was saying: exhibit bold leadership. This is the time to rise to the occasion. This is the time to demonstrate bold leadership. Now, bold leadership does not mean command and control. Okay, bold leadership means communicating. It means honesty. It means making informed decisions and making a decision. Doesn't mean it's going to last forever. Things change, but make a decision and communicate it to the people, the why of that decision. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that is a great place to end. So I just want to thank you, Trace and Chuck. That's been some great tactical advice, and I think I really believe that when you see two experienced individuals in industry echo each other's comments, I think what it means is that there's a lot of the right information being put forward. So I think that's fantastic.